Hello YouTube, welcome to another flight sim video from FS Pro. Today I'm flying an Airbus A320 in United Airlines livery from Orlando International Airport, KMCO, in Florida, southeastern USA, to Denver International Airport, KDEN, in Colorado, Midwest USA. A total journey time of approximately 4 hours. This show continues the steady progression of skills and techniques that are introduced into each of my Airbus flight sim videos. Today I'm adding simulated vectors from ATC during the standard instrument departure, using the direct button to get back onto track, and removing waypoints mid-flight. This is a follow-on from my Circuit of KDEN video that introduced a whole number of new skills and techniques. If you haven't already seen that video, I recommend that you take a look, as it covers some elements that I refer to today. I'll put a link on screen now. The recording of the actual flight shows a frame counter in the top left of the screen. This is provided by Shadowplay and shows the live frame rate on my machine. Its value is in showing a comparison between frame rates at different points in the journey, so you can establish just how hard the CPU is having to work at any stage in flight. Okay, with the introduction complete, let's head to flight planning. This is the airport diagram for Orlando Airport. We have 4 runways, all of which head roughly north-south. The plan for today has me taking off from runway 36 right. My Airbus is currently parked at airside 2. As you can see, it's a considerable distance from gate to threshold and is yet another opportunity to practice my taxiing skills. Next, let's take a look at the Jaguar 4 departure chart. After takeoff, we need to head to the ORL VORTAC, then fly outbound at 355 degrees. However, none of the published transitions for the Jaguar 4 departure suit us, as they all transition to the north of the state and we want to head to the northwest. Fortunately, if we look at page 2 of the departure chart, we see that we should maintain 5,000 feet and can then expect vectors to an appropriate transition within 10 minutes after departure. This should suit us well. I'm going to be simulating vectors from ATC during this phase of the flight. Note that to do this effectively, I'll be deleting the SID as entered by PFPX, my flight planning software, and entering it manually instead. This will insert a discontinuity between the VORTAC and the remainder of the route, which is exactly what I want. Having looked at the airport and the departure chart, let's look at the flight plan as produced by PFPX. I've entered in all of the details required to produce the route which you can see depicted. From this page, I'll note the number of passengers and the cargo, as well as the SID, JAG4, and the currently projected star, Quail 7. Now, let's look at the details of the computed route. From here, I'll note the release fuel required and check that we're not going to break the maximum landing weight number. Finally, let's check the flight plan. I'll check over everything to ensure that it makes sense and also note down the initial altitude number, in this case flight level 340. So now we have everything we need. Let's board and enter the flight deck. So here we are. Dawn has just broken at Orlando, where it's a nice, warm, balmy temperature here in the midst of a very cold day here in the winter in the UK. Anyway, let's fire up. We'll start by turning on the overhead integrated lights and then do our normal startup routine with batteries, external power, the APU, and switching on the ADIRS. With that done, let's go and turn on the screens with the PFD and the navigation display, followed by the eCams. Quick look and set up the checklists and the co-pilot. Let's open up the aircraft doors so that we can start to load passengers and cargo and so on. Today, for the first time, I'm adding in GSX, that's Ground Services Extreme. I haven't used it today before this video, so do expect some interesting events to occur as I go through and prepare the aircraft for takeoff. So we'll request catering. That's something we've never normally had to do with the Aerosoft Airbus. And request refueling. Unlike the standard refueling that we have with the Aerosoft Airbus, the refueling with GSX is extremely fast. By comparison, the loading of food for the passengers seems to take forever. Loading of cargo is something that also seems to take a considerable amount of time. So there'll be some interesting challenges that I'll face as I go through the startup routine here. I'm accustomed at this stage to clicking on the start boarding, load cargo, load fuel buttons, but I'm going to try to use GSX to do this instead.
Cockpit preparation checklist.
Batteries.
Both on.
Electrical power.
APU on.
Navigation lights.
On.
Engine master.
Both off.
Engine mode selector.
Checked normal.
Landing gear lever.
Checked.
Parking brake.
Off.
Flaps.
Checked position.
Speed brake lever.
Checked retracted.
Thrust levers.
Idle.
Transponder mode.
Checked standby.
Radio control panel.
Set on.
ECAM recall.
Checked.
Anti-skid.
On.
Flight director.
On.
Emergency lights.
Set.
No smoking signs.
Set on.
Anti-ice.
Off.
Probe window heat.
Auto.
Air condition.
Checked.
Ventilation panel.
Is checked.
Electric panel.
Checked.
Fuel pumps.
Set on.
Hydraulics.
Is checked.
Accu-brake pressure.
Checked.
Ground proximity warning system.
On.
Electronic flight control system.
On.
Bed ears.
Checked.
Emergency equipment.
Is checked.
Checklist complete.
So as you can see, the MCDU has calculated a flex takeoff temperature for us of 67 degrees. The runway here is so long, it makes good sense for us to use that. I'm going to dial in the limits for the altitude that we need to maintain for our departure and push those into managed mode, and the same for the speed and the heading. As I mentioned in the planning phase, I'm going to delete the SID as entered by PFPX and re-enter it, and I'll get the flight plan discontinuity here, which is what I want to handle the manual phase to simulate the vectors from air traffic. I won't enter in the star now, of course. I'll do that in flight. The constraints are correctly entered. That's all good. We're estimating fuel on board for when we land as being 7 tons. It'll be interesting to see what we actually end up with. So I'm not having much luck with GSX here at the moment, although I'm getting the catering stuff on board and the fuel is fully loaded. Well, I've got no passengers on board and no cargo either. What I ended up doing was to use the load passengers and load cargo buttons provided by Aerosoft. I'm sure this is down to my misunderstanding of how to use GSX appropriately. So take that for what it's worth. A realistic depiction of the monorail in the background, but unfortunately an unrealistic connection of the jetway to the front passenger door here on our Airbus, and again that's simply because I haven't learned how to do that yet. I'm sure I'll improve in upcoming videos. So it looks as if everything is getting loaded up now. Time to do some more checks on the flight deck before we have the opportunity to get underway.
Captain, the cabin is secure. All passengers.
So while they do that, here's a quick reminder of the Jaguar 4 departure that we'll be taking for our takeoff. Taking off from runway 36 right. We need to be at or above 2,300 feet by the ORL 2 mile marker.
Disconnected and off.
Cabin signs,
Set on.
thrust levers,
Idle.
parking brake,
And at the ORL
Set
VORTAC
on.
at or above 3,000 feet before heading out on 355 degrees. At which point I'll be simulating getting some instructions
Set.
from air traffic
1, 0,
and
4.
accepting vectors from them.
0, 2, 4, check. Beacon
Although
lights,
this first page for
Set
the
on.
departure doesn't show us how that would work, we do get a bit more information when we take a look at the second page of the departure chart. So again, just as a reminder, here it is that we can expect vectors to an appropriate transition. We should maintain 5,000 feet and expect clearance to a filed altitude and flight level within 10 minutes after departure. So when we configure ourselves to take off, I'll make sure that we've got 5,000 feet dialed into the altitude, and then we'll follow vectors as supplied by air traffic. Here comes our pushback trolley.
Captain, the cabin is secure. All passengers are aboard.
Just looking at the setup on the FCU here, I can see that I still have my barometric pressure setting reading in hectopascals rather than inches of mercury. I do change this shortly, but it's another one of those things you need to consider when we're flying in North America.
Starting engine 2.
Here, 3187, look for dash 8 right to left there at November, then runway 22 right, taxi via November, cross runway 15 left. Alright, forward dash, November, cross 15 left, Richard, 3187.
And back we go. The tug or whatever they call those little things that that push the aircraft back that you can see ahead of us there is provided in the default scenery. We do actually have the GSX tug which is pushing us underneath. It's not that somehow GSX has let us down and is pushing us back, but they are actually remaining static at the jetway. An interesting ghostly halo around those palm trees to the right hand side there.
Engine 2 is stabilized.
Starting number 1.
So as I mentioned in the introduction, it's quite a long trip between our jetway here on airside 2 to the threshold for runway 36 right. So what I'll probably do once we finish this pushback procedure is I will speed up the video so that you don't have to watch my mangled attempts at trying to keep the Airbus running on the straight and narrow.
Engine 1 is stabilized. Parking brakes are set.
American 142 Oscar, taxi via Alpha, your second right turn. Second right turn, Alpha, American 142.
After start checklist.
Engine mode selector.
Set.
APU bleed.
Set off.
APU master.
Set off.
Ground spoilers.
Set.
Rudder trim.
Checked 0.
Pitch trim.
Checked.
Flight controls.
Full left. Full right. Neutral. Full up. Full down. Neutral. Rudder. Full left. Full right. Neutral.
Check. Flaps.
Flaps 1.
Anti-ice.
Off.
ECAM status.
Checked.
ECAM door page.
Checked.
Hand signal.
Received.
Checklist complete.
JetBlue Airbus Boston. Just a reposition from Charlie 26 to South Cargo, please. JetBlue Airbus pushback advisory to south. Push it advisory, JetBlue Airbus. Number 633 taxi. JetBlue 633, runway 22 left. Taxi via Alpha November, cross runway 15 right, hold short, runway 15 left. Still left via Alpha November, cross 15 right, short of 15 left, JetBlue 633. JetBlue 633 at Bravo, give way to a twin Cessna, please. Bravo, give way to the twin Cessna, JetBlue 633. 22, you see a JetBlue off your left in November, gives way to you. Cactus 225 are ready to taxi. Cactus 225 are ready to runway 22 right, taxi via Echo Alpha November, cross runway 15 right, hold short runway 15 left. 22 right, Echo Alpha November, clear cross 15 right, hold short of 15 left, taxi 225. And 537 is clearing here at Echo for gate Alpha 6. United 537, Echo straight into the gate. Echo straight into the gate. 225, turn right at Echo 2, join Kilo, Kilo Alpha November, same hold short instructions. Roger, Echo 2, Kilo November, Alpha November.
Taxiing checklist.
3187,
No flight.
United, and then turn
Set
left
on.
taxi via
Brake
Alpha,
check.
Lima,
Pedal
runway
pressed.
15 right,
Checked 0.
November.
Check. Auto brakes.
Max.
Takeoff data.
Reviewed.
FCU.
Checked.
Flight instruments.
Checked.
Check. TO config.
Set.
Checklist complete.
Ground, Lufthansa 423 Heavy, request taxi. Lufthansa 423 Heavy, Monster Ground, register, runway 22 left, taxi via Lima, Bravo, November, cross runway 15 right, hold short runway 15 left. Lufthansa 423 Heavy, for runway 22 left via Lima, Bravo, November, cross runway 15 right, and 15 left. Just 849 Boston Ground, taxi via Bravo, Alpha 1. Oh, Alpha 1, thank you, 849. Lufthansa 423 Heavy, cross runway 15 right, hold short runway 15 left. We confirm, crossing runway 15 right, hold short runway 15 left, Lufthansa 423, and just to be sure, we don't need to contact ramp here, right? That is correct, Air 22, cross runway 15 left, monitor tower 128.8, good day.
Cross 15 left, tower 28.8, good day.
Jet with 633, cross runway 15 left, hold short runway 22 right. 15 left, 32 right, that's the one. American 1852, as you make the left turn, give way to the second U.S. Airways, it's an Airbus.
Roger, American 1852.
Gear 3187, if you could pick up the taxi speed, that would be appreciated.
Alright, I'll tell the guy, thanks.
JetBlue, Airbus, understand you're ready to tow, stand by. JetBlue, Airbus, with 633, monitor tower 128.8, enjoy your day. 28, thanks a lot, JetBlue 633, thank you. Gear 3187, the menu taxi instructions make it Alpha Zulu, runway 15 right, hold short of November.
Alright, Alpha Zulu now, on 15 right, short of November, we're here at 3187.
1770 Boston Ground, what you gave?
We're gate.
Well, that little bit of taxiing there certainly used more fuel than my
Before
car
takeoff
that I
checklist.
used to go backwards and forwards to work.
Brake temperature.
Checked.
Brake fans.
Off.
Engine mode selector.
Checked normal.
TCAS.
TARA. Tilt above.
Exterior lights.
Your second right turn.
Second right turn,
Set on.
Sliding tables.
Stowed.
Stowed. Checklist complete.
Sorry, PD4, do you say again? We're on station.
Always seems good practice to do that checklist prior to getting to the stop point here, before entering the runway. Although the instruction to set takeoff thrust immediately, I guess, kind of flies in the face of that a little bit. I'd be interested in knowing your opinion about whether or not you think that's the appropriate time to run that checklist, or whether in fact we should do it on the runway. Seems light enough now, so I've turned off the overhead integrated light. And let's progress onto the runway lineup and get ready for takeoff.
the wind is calm, good takeoff. Delta 699, good takeoff. 723, line of wind up 50 right. Line of wind, 50 right, 723. Delta 41 in a breeze 25, contact near departure. Point climb over to departure, Delta 41, good.
On runway 36, right.
Oops, just a bit too far to the right. Let's try and line up properly. And then smoothly push the throttle forward to about a 50% setting, just to make sure that they're spooling up smoothly and behaving as they should, which they are. So we'll push forward into the flex detent.
Take off. Man, flex, SRS and runway.
Check. Power set.
Runway heading departure, good day, thank you, Delta. Good contact. Delta 203, wind is calm, runway 50 right, good takeoff. Just take off 50 right, Delta 203. Delta 175, getting tower, runway 50 right, line of wind.
100 knots.
Checked.
Beat 1. Rotate.
Pull back gently on the stick, and we're away.
Positive climb.
Gear up.
Gear up.
Navigation.
Check.
You can see on the navigation display it's a very short run to get us to the ORL 2-mile marker and then overhead the ORL VORTAC.
Gears up. Lights off.
Climb thrust. Autopilot on.
So as we approach the VORTAC now, I'm going to simulate the instructions from air traffic. The first requirement for us, of course, is to head out on a bearing of 355 degrees. So I'll dial that in using the heading knob, and then I'll pull that to take control from the aircraft and to take over
The
myself.
after takeoff checklist.
Engine mode selector.
Check normal.
Spoilers.
Disarmed.
So effectively I've just moved it from managed mode into selected
Gear
mode.
up. Lights off.
Exterior lights.
Set off.
Tax.
Both on.
Anti-ice.
Off.
TCAS.
Checked.
Altimeter.
303.
302. Checked. Checklist complete.
At this stage we're climbing up to 5,000 feet as was stated on the departure chart. And here I'm just going to show that you cannot actually clear that flight plan discontinuity when we're in flight. How we'll deal with it I'll cover in just a moment. So you can see on the navigation display then the track that we're currently flying is shown with a continuous green line heading to the top of the screen, and to the left of that there is a dotted line showing on the navigation display, which was our original intended track, and that'll become useful to us in a moment. Let's simulate an instruction from air traffic then to turn left onto heading 300 if I can finally dial it in. And you can see that a heading of 300 is taking us roughly parallel with our original intended course. And shortly I'll simulate another instruction from air traffic to turn left onto a heading of due west 270 degrees. That instruction will then start to take us closer to intersecting with our original intended course. Shortly I'll simulate an instruction from air traffic to climb to 10,000 feet, and I'll do that the same way I did with the heading, which is to dial in the selected altitude and then pull on that particular control to take control from the Airbus to myself. So I'm moving it again out of managed mode and into selected mode. I'm sure you are already aware, but just in case there's somebody new watching and wondering how we separate the difference between a push and a pull on the speed, heading or altitude knobs. To push, it's a left click, and to pull, it's a right click with your mouse. So we're climbing up to 10,000 feet now, and we're just about to intersect our track, and I'm going to simulate now that air traffic is giving us clearance to continue on our filed route. So to do that, I hit the direct button, select the next waypoint I want to go to, which is Verhi, and then select to insert that into our flight plan, so we'll fly from our present position to the VAR HI waypoint. With that done, you may have noticed that the heading and the altitude both went into managed mode, and I've simply dialed in the altitude now to our cruise altitude of flight level 340. So this whole stage up until now has simulated vectors and changes in altitude as instructed by air traffic during our departure, and having followed those, I've now got us back onto our original course and entered in our original flight level of 340. We're simply back to where the plan would originally now have taken us.
Lights off.
And that finishes this part of the video. Join me later for the second part of my trip from Orlando to Denver.